Hi there, Year 10, it's Miss Payne again, and today we're going to start to explore the third poem in the anthology for our third poetry shot. So today we're going to look at the extract from the Prelude. Without further ado, let's get on with it because as we all know, this is a bit of a beast of a poem. So here we go. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain, and stepping in, pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all onto one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rows proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, the horizon's utmost boundary. Far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When, from behind that craggy steep till then, the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head, I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own, and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. There, in her mooring place, I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, in grave and serious mood. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Over my thoughts there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, move slowly through the mind by day, and were a trouble to my dreams. Very strange poem, very difficult for us with our modern perspectives to get our heads around it. But I'm thinking that whilst we explore some context, we'll start to get a grip of what the poet Wordsworth is trying to say. So as usual, I'm going to begin with context and we'll start to explore the additional things that attach to that as we go through. Beginning, we've got to think about how Wordsworth, like both Blake and indeed Shelley, was another one of the romantics, again, an early romantic. So he had very similar ideas about nature to what we saw last week when we were exploring London. And so as a romantic, you've got to think about how they valued this idea of nature so much. So just reminding you, reiterating these ideas. There was a concept that the natural world was so healing, that it was so incredibly powerful, but there was also this concept of the sublime that really comes through, a little bit like in Ozymandias, where we see the power of nature. Now, the sublime in this context is all about how nature has the power to be really inspirational to mankind, and it can do good to his soul, it can nourish him, and those sorts of things. However, it can also fill man with incredible awe and fear because of its power. So when you think about it, the ideas of thunderstorms, you know, that the electricity that they generate were a source of great fascination to people at this time. Remember, the scientific revolution and all of those things had really just started to happen. So when you think about that idea of the sublime, what you see are contrary or opposite states of nature. And also man himself has those opposite sides to him. And we can see some of that starting to come through. So as we link through to AO2, and when we talk a little bit more about what the poem's about, I will keep drifting back to context so that hopefully you'll be able to see why this poem makes sense to us today. So in this poem, what we actually see is that it's really about a guy that takes a boat He breaks boundaries, he goes places he shouldn't go, and he ends up being very frightened by what he sees. So the familiar world suddenly becomes a very unfamiliar one to him. And as a result of this, we see the spiritual growth of the poet. We can presume that the poet is the speaker. And also we think about how this guy, Wordsworth, comes to terms with who he is and really starts to think about his place in nature and the world. When you're young, as you lot are, you believe yourselves to be indestructible. And this experience for Wordsworth was one that was his first realization that his mortality is very much present. Now, you have to remember that Wordsworth was a lake poet. He was very much inspired by the Lake District. And if any of you have been there, oh my goodness, Wordsworth is of course everywhere. But you can kind of see why he gets this inspiration when you're up on the hills and the tors and things like that in the lakes. The weather can suddenly change from being beautiful to being incredibly dangerous. I've experienced that myself, so I can understand that sense that he would have had. You have to also think about how Wordsworth himself described the Prelude, and I've written this down, as a poem on the growth of my own mind. And he therefore contrasts views of man, nature, and society. So it's all about that sense of growth. There is a term for sets 1 and 2 that you might want to know. When you see a journey from somebody who goes almost from boyhood to adulthood, they have an experience that makes that transition. It's known as a Bildungsroman, okay? Please don't worry about that, guys. I'm sure your teacher will talk about it with you if you've not heard of it before. So really, we've got to think about this sense that Wordsworth doesn't view humanity as having authority over nature. Again, this links to the context of the sublime. We are powerless when we are faced with it. Remember that. On to AO2. I'm going to try and be quite quick because obviously the poem is a bit longer and I've taken a while to read that to you today. So let's just start with thinking about the tone of it. It starts off as very conversational, and the poet uses "and" quite often. And what this does is it really gives the verse this breathless quality, which adds to ideas of admiration and fear. So and he's going through, and we're really sort of getting this sense that there's this excitement that comes from being out in nature. Setting is also good. We can use that when we're thinking about both language and structure, but here we've got the night, the nocturnal world being used to create effect. And we've got this glittering moonlight at the beginning. However, this then becomes the grey darkness as we go through, as the poet/speaker's state of mind becomes really troubled by the end of the extract. So we've got phrases like "trouble to my dreams." What we've got with this dark imagery is connection to what we would call the Gothic. You may think back to when we were studying The Woman in Black as students in year 8, I believe it was, or year 9. And think about this sense that the Gothic was sinister or grotesque. And some of the features of those are stories and nightmares. And we've also got the horrific adjectives that we would expect to see there, such as grim, black, and huge. I also want to mention as well this idea that the language at the beginning of the poem is very much idealized. So it's almost heavenly. We've got things like glittering, those lovely verbs there, and we're thinking of sparkling light. So those sorts of things do suggest that we see this massive transition. So again, links to context, contrary states of the human soul. We've got a real key device of personification being used by Wordsworth here. And the first time that we see it is where we see him referring to the boat as her. Now, this is interesting because we actually see this first, reference to things within nature being feminized. And even in the first line, it says "one summer evening led by her." Now, this "her" is this feminine form, of course, and it's referring to Mother Nature. So it's interesting to consider how women are very much considered to be that natural force that has led this man astray. Remember, he's stolen this boat. Also, we've got this sense, this negative sense of personification again, where the mountain peak comes alive and chases him. The mountain strode after him. Look at that verb there. This makes nature seem like a predator. And it is that sense that he went over a boundary, okay? You'll find that on line 15. Now, the Romantics believed that we shouldn't overstep boundaries. There was this fear from the scientific revolution that I've already mentioned, that boundaries just should not be overstepped or overreached. So this concept of people being the overreacher is something that we need to learn a lesson from. Know your place, know the power of nature. That's all really important. So with nature in mind, when we're looking at the language here, we're made to feel very small in this poem, and certainly insignificant too, because we see language like power, towered, huge and mighty. Look at that lexical field there, demonstrating how we are microscopic in the face of the unexpected. We also see these strange ideas of loneliness that come through. Wordsworth's speaker, or himself here, definitely feels this sense of being totally alone in the face of nature. When we think about the Romantics, they were very much preoccupied with this idea, because there was a sense, you can hear my cat meowing quite possibly, you can hear this sense or see this sense in the poem of a difference between solitude and isolation. Now remember, solitude is where you choose to be alone. That's what we get at the start of the poem. We see that he's enjoying being alone within nature. However, it then moves to isolation. The choice is then taken away from him. He feels a lack of control. And that is the distinction between the two things. And for those higher set students, that's a really lovely concept that you could talk about contextually for this poem. I want to also think again of how that links to the night. We've already mentioned how the night is used to give that sort of Gothic sense almost. But when we think about it too, it really does help to add to the sense of being alone. The night conceals things, and certainly does in this case as well. So thinking a little bit now about structure, and then I will leave you alone. I've just realised I've not mentioned the title, so I'll talk about that at the end. You need to think about how the Prelude can be seen as an extract from what we call an epic poem, a huge poem that tells the story of someone's journey from childhood to adulthood. And although many events in this poem are ordinary, they show the huge impact that small things can have on our lives. Possibly not unlike this time in your lives, guys, thinking about the year that you missed a couple of terms of school due to the coronavirus, the effect that that had on you. So when you consider this, it's like a chapter. How I mentioned last week with London, how we saw the quatrains being like a snapshot of a different moment or a different glimpse that he saw. Here we can certainly see that this is a chapter of Wordsworth's life. This poem is written as well in blank verse. Remember, unrhymed, iambic pentameter. And this is reflecting the sense of power of nature. We saw that in Ozymandias too, do you remember? Additionally, we see in this poem lots of volta being used. So remember, a volta is just a proper word for a turning point, and it's where the poem changes tone. So we see it change from the beginning, where it's beautiful, to something fearful at the end. And the points that we see that are with words like when in line 21. And we've also got the word but in 10 or 11. So we see those lines going. We start to see changes happening progressively, and they kind of go from worse to worse, okay? So they don't actually improve. We also need to think as well, structurally again, remember it's important to think about setting and also how it's structured like a journey. So it starts, you know, he steals the boat, he goes out in it, and then we see that it becomes increasingly rough and hostile on the way. So the tone is very relevant here. We see those shifts. All right, now at the end, we do see in this poem that there is something of a lesson which you can talk about in terms of structure. There is this sense that something has changed. There is this sense that there is a warning attached to it. And so it ends on a very low note and a very haunting one, suggesting that this has had such a massive impact on the man himself. So I'm just going to mention the title, forgot to do that at the beginning. Remember, I do bang on about this, but as an examiner, that is one of my favourite things to see students talk about. You need to consider that the word prelude itself is I think in terms of a dictionary definition, would be an introduction to something more important. So thinking about how this poem does teach us a lesson, there is a sense that he has learnt something very important. This marks a new chapter in his life where he doesn't perhaps take nature for granted, where he recognises that he is a very, very small particle in the wider universe as a whole. Right, so I hope you managed to bear with me through that one, Year 10. It's a really tricky poem, this one. I can't say it's my favourite, but do bear in mind that this bad boy hasn't yet come up in the exam. So it is one to make sure that you're knowing, as are they all, of course. So do take care and stay safe. I will be seeing you for your live lessons on Fridays. So you do take care of yourselves, and I will see you very soon. Much love to you all. Bye now.